Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. My name is Brendan, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my overall thoughts and experience at Flatiron School. Let's talk about it. First off, I wanted to give you guys some context for those of you that are new to my channel. Originally, I had started this channel to actually document my experience throughout this program. 4 weeks into the program, I actually got promoted from my sales job to a product design job at the company I work at. The plan still was to stay the course with this program because I wanted to grow as a designer and I felt like this would be a great place for me to do so. I made a video about why I dropped out of the program and I'll share that link in the description. Ultimately, I just felt like the value of the program was not being justified by the cost, but I will talk about this in more detail in a moment. I personally felt like I learned just as much or more taking UX courses at my community college and learning online through online courses, books, and those kind of things, YouTube videos like you're doing here. For me, I just didn't feel like there was enough value. So after 8 weeks of a 10-month program, I ended up dropping out. Now I still do believe that some can benefit from being in this environment. Let's talk about why I chose Flatiron in the first place. I made a video titled How to Evaluate UX Boot Camps, and I'm going to link that into the description. But in that video, I talked about my criteria for picking a design bootcamp, and that's what we're going to be reviewing. I had 8 criteria for what I was looking for in a program: instructor quality, curriculum, program length, mentorship, design critique, portfolio building, collaboration with classmates, and job placement. I didn't finish the program, but after spending 2 months, I do feel I can give you an honest assessment of these areas, so let's take a look. I'm actually going to be skipping over program length since this is so subjective, as well as job placement because it wasn't relevant for me, but let's take a look at the rest. And one more last note, as I mentioned, I did spend over a year learning UX on my own, and I'm also doing it full time, so I have both experience on the job as well as experience doing it on my own. I also had freelance clients before, so I was at a different position than everybody else in the cohort, quite frankly, but I'm gonna judge this as unbiasedly or as specific to my knowledge as possible, just for you to be able to hopefully get some information and value out of this. To give you some context on my learning, I have taken a UX community college course. I have 4 online course certifications through the Interaction Design Foundation. I've taken a few courses on Udemy and Coursera, and I even audited Lambda School's UX program online, so I have some context as far as what another bootcamp might look like. And of course, I am comparing my experience at Flatiron School to all of these experiences. First, let's take a look at instructor quality. This, quite honestly, is maybe the most difficult one to judge just because my experience in phase 1 was very different from my experience in phase 2. And let's be honest, it really depends on who you get. You will have multiple instructors in each phase. One typically leads the lectures, and then the others will be in the lectures, but they will give like secondary feedback in those lectures. And then you'll be assigned one that you'll work with, and they'll grade your assignments as well as meet with you one-on-one and give you feedback. And the 2 instructors that I worked closely with, one was for 6 weeks, the other was for 2 weeks in phase 2. They both had 20 years of experience, and I felt like they were definitely qualified to be teaching and had a lot to offer for me. The first one I felt gave me a ton of advice and gave me good direction for what I was doing, whereas the other one was giving me minimal advice and really I had no sense of direction because there wasn't really much I could improve on from the feedback that I was given. And this, quite honestly, was a big factor for why I left the program. The instructor I had in phase 1 was the one that actually led the lectures, and the one in phase 2 was in the lectures but really never spoke up, so it wasn't valuable for me just because I couldn't pick his brain with all of his experience within those lectures. And during the week I dropped out, they did bring in another instructor. However, it was 20% into the program or that phase, so it almost felt like it was too little too late in my opinion, but perhaps it got better. Overall, I would give instructor quality a 7 out of 10. Next, let's take a look at curriculum. This is another section that of course is a little challenging to grade given I have prior learning experiences, but I'm going to do my best. The lectures in phase 1 were once a week for about an hour, And then in phase 2, they were 2 hours. And the phase 1, we spent technically an hour and a half on those calls, but we'd go over the homework assignments for the last half hour, which I felt was really inefficient, and we could have really used that time wisely to learn a lot more. And additionally, you would get pre-recorded lectures and readings for you to look at throughout the week as you were learning and doing these assignments. I felt like the lecture had a lot of good content, but for somebody that would be seeing these things for the first time, there's just no way you'd be able to retain even half of what we're going over in those lectures. These concepts take a lot of time to learn, and after every lecture they would ask us what's one thing you had to take away, but it would always feel like information overload and you couldn't even remember one thing after, and you would be scrambling to think of what's the one thing I learned today. And rarely did I learn something that I hadn't seen or researched or done my own homework on prior to coming to Flatiron School, but I did feel like the concepts were being taught on point to what I had seen and learned before, which was great. We did cover a lot in these lectures, but quite frankly, I felt like we just scratched the surface on each of these concepts. In my opinion, I feel like it would have been way better to have, say, 2 lectures a week, and these be an hour long each, and have a way to go deeper into each of these concepts. I think you would learn a lot more if you spent more than 2 minutes on, say, one concept and then moved on to the next. To put it in a real world perspective, think about how we learned mathematics when we were in elementary school. There would be a chapter and it would be broken down into 1.1, 1.2, maybe all the way out to 1.10. Well, if you were in a lecture, it would be like learning 2 or 3 chapters within a lecture. And that's how little you could get into each of those sections. So spending, say, 2 minutes on a contextual inquiry, you're not going to be learning much about it, and then you're going to have to go do an assignment and do a contextual inquiry and hope you learn enough by doing. Now, I do know it's an immersive program and you're going to be thrown in and learn a ton of things, but it is a 10-month program after all. This isn't 10 weeks at General Assembly. You should be able to learn more and go into better detail over 10 months. Perhaps instead of phases 1 and 2 being learning phases and then phases 3 and 4 being client / like portfolio piece phases, you should be learning these concepts throughout and taking your time as you really hone in on these concepts. But that's just a thought. Overall, I'd give the curriculum a 6 because the content was good, but the depth and the amount of time you'd spend on each of these did lack, in my opinion. Moving on to mentorship. I should be clear that Flatiron School does not offer a true mentorship feature as you might see in, say, Springboard, but you do have some components of what you might be getting there. What I mean by mentorship is you get to have a one-on-one call with your instructor to talk about your assignments, go over your work, and that kind of thing. Now, technically speaking, you're only supposed to have 15 minutes a week, but in the first phase, I spent about 30 minutes plus on every call that I had with my instructor, and I felt like these were really beneficial and helped me to grow. I will say a lot of this time was spent going over previous and upcoming assignments, which is great, but I think that we could have used that in maybe a different way or more productive way. It did help with my technical skills when we could talk out things that he had gave me feedback on, but ultimately, like I said, I think there was something missing there. Really, it would have been nice to ask questions about their experience in the field, dig deeper into the lecture, or even just get career advice in general. I think all of these would have been really helpful to have in a mentorship one-on-one call. And as I mentioned, both of my instructors had 20 years of experience, so I felt like there was a lot of untapped knowledge that I could have had if we would have spent more productive time in those one-on-one mentor meetings, which is partly on me because I could have led those, but I think a lot of the times it was based around the assignments. Similar to my review on Instructor Quality, I really didn't have any mentorship when it came to phase 2. Overall, I would give mentorship a 5. One of the highlights of my experience was design critique. The program is so heavily revolved around the upcoming assignments due twice a week, so you'd be constantly getting feedback on the work that you were working on. I felt like the feedback I was getting in phase 1 was very useful in those 6 weeks, which is a big reason why I continued with the program and I was happy with the program at that point. The feedback that we'd be getting would be within Canvas, which is what we use to submit our assignments, or within Envision, which is often the link that we would submit into Canvas. The one thing I will say is I wish that my peers were giving me more feedback, because I think that this was a big miss when it came to the overall program. I turned in well over 20 assignments and I only got feedback from my peers one time. Overall, I would give design critique an 8, simply because of my instructor in phase 1. Next, let's take a look at portfolio building. This is another nice feature of the program, but it definitely has some flaws. First off, in phase 1, we spent 6 weeks going through a travel app that we were building and going through various exercises around this travel app. I truly saw this useful. I think when you're building a portfolio piece, you want to spend that kind of time making sure that you do the kind of steps and research and design process while building that portfolio piece, because I think a lot of the times when it comes to showing off your work, people want to know that process. So we did a good job in that first phase. In phase 2, our brief was for 12 weeks, and so we were building a digital project for the library. I felt like this to me was a little long to be working a quarter on one assignment. So that one I might say we should have done, say, 2, like we did in phase 1, but I didn't finish it, so I don't know fully how that ended up looking, but that's just my 2 cents on that. And in phases 3 and 4, you were specifically working on building your portfolio. And the reason that I bring this up is because in the first 2 phases, you're supposed to be learning all of the concepts and not spending so much time working on these pieces. So I feel like we could have dove deeper into these concepts and these fundamentals of UX, as well as interaction design, UI design, all the things that you learn in the first phase, and ultimately just have a better learning experience doing those things, and then worry about building our portfolio in the second half of the program. So for example, we could have done role playing when it came to user interviews with our instructor and our cohort, working with our peers. And I think that would be a really good exercise, instead of just doing a user interview, getting graded on it, and then moving on to the next assignment. There wasn't really any practice before we actually did our first user interview. And realistically, they're missing the opportunity of working within those groups. When you go to a program, you're working with other people, versus if you're doing it on your own, you don't get to work with those people, practice your user interviews, and feed off of each other as far as ideas for building a new app. That is something they completely missed, in my opinion. But overall, when it comes to portfolio building, I'm going to give it a 7. Lastly, as I just touched on it, let's talk about collaboration with classmates. First off, I should mention that I was only in the second cohort for Flatiron's online UX UI program. This wasn't brought to my attention up front. In fact, I felt like they kind of hid it. I found out a week before I quit that I was actually in the second cohort, and so this was an issue for me, quite honestly. The reason it was an issue is because Flatiron used the in-person program as well as designation, like the metrics that they had for the previous cohorts at designation, to basically say this is what we've been able to do. And it didn't feel like that was very clear to me up front that this was the second cohort. And mind you, if you don't know, designation has been around for many years, so they have that kind of experience. And I know that Flatiron acquired designation, but it is a different program. And when you were in the application process, they made it seem like you had to have done previous learning or done your homework, practiced some exercises around UX. At least you'd have some experience, is kind of my point, when you get into this program. And it felt like it was a lot more difficult maybe to get in than it really was. When I started, our cohort was around 20 to 25 students. And of those, about 16 or so showed up for the first lecture. The following week, we only had about half of that. And mind you, there's only 1 lecture a week. And by the last lecture, which was 6 weeks in, we only had 3 people show up. Now, I get that people work and they don't necessarily want to miss it, but why would you miss such an important part of this program? Realistically, it does hurt every single person involved in the program when you don't show up. And if you were to go to, say, Lambda school, you'd be kicked out if you didn't make the lectures. So yes, I am calling out everybody involved to fix this at Flatiron School, because I think that this is a real issue if not everyone's showing up, giving their feedback, and helping each other grow. I did feel bad for the instructors, but I realized that this is really an issue that the admissions team failed to address when they were recruiting people in the first place. I think that they could have found people that would have been better fits, and I don't know if it's they have to get the word out and do more marketing, but it's a real issue. You can't have a cohort of 25 people drop all the way down to 5, and then the rest of the people in the cohort for the first phase, it felt like we're never showing up to the lectures and we weren't interacting with them. In phase 2, you split up into UX and UI. 8 people went the UI path, which you get to work individually, and only 5 people went into UX, and those are the people that work in groups. So it was really challenging for me because I had 4 people to learn from, and all 4 of those people had never done UX. And really, from 20 to 25 people in your cohort to 5 people, and I get people can choose between UX and UI, it still felt like a bait and switch to me, quite frankly. And this, to me, completely tarnishes the experience that you have in the program, and I think it's completely unacceptable. I was told that they expected around 20% to drop off, but if you anticipate this, you should have a larger cohort, in my opinion. At Springboard, they have 60 to 80 people in their cohort, so if they do have people dropping off, they quoted 76% Springboard that finished the program, well, you'd still have a lot of people to still learn from and grow with in the program. And I respect the 4 that are still there doing the program. They're doing a great job. They're all going to learn together. I'm really excited to see where they go with their UX careers. It's just kind of unfortunate that it worked out the way that it did. We were actually split up into 2 teams, and one of those teams had 3 people. I was in that team, and the 2 people in my group were, like I said, brand new, and I really just felt like because my instructor wasn't as involved, that I was the instructor of our group. And it felt like that I was paying to guide other students to learn. The last thing I wanted to mention is that phase 1 was all individual work. I interacted with 2 other guys throughout the first phase that were in my cohort, but I really felt like the instructors could have done a much better job to put together groups or people and do more group activities, because I felt like this is an advantage of being in a boot camp, and especially being online. I feel like they need to do a better job engaging the class, which is why I think you have so many people dropping out, because they're not bringing everybody in. It was simply like you sank or you swam. Overall, I would give collaboration with students a 3. And I just wanted to cover the last few things that you should know before you apply. Now, I did the income share agreement, and after I dropped out, I'm still going to be required to pay the percentage of the time that I spent in the program, which for me is $2,679 for 8 weeks. And how it works is after 3 months from now, I'm going to be paying 10% of my income to pay off that $2,679. The whole program would have cost $22,000 had I stayed in the program, given the amount of money that I make. And at $22,000, I feel like you could get a lot more value taking courses online, doing other things than going to this program. But there is a value in going to this kind of a program, working with this kind of a structure. So I won't say that this is bad for everyone, but for me, this just wasn't a good fit. Now, of course, the program is still very new. I was the 2nd cohort, so I know they're going to work hard to fix a lot of the problems that I might be talking about. However, I don't think I should have to pay the same amount that the person in cohort 7 or 8 or 10 has to pay. And so hopefully they don't raise the price, but that's just my thoughts on this. Of course, take everything I say with a grain of salt. This is my experience. I'm going to be putting out another video at the same time I'm putting out this video, and it's going to be titled, "Are UX UI Bootcamps Worth It?" And in this video, I'm actually going to be talking about somebody who sent me a message, and they're trying to decide if they want to attend a boot camp. They've already gotten in, and so make sure to check that out. Make sure to also like and subscribe, leave questions, comments. Please, if you have any other questions regarding Flatiron School or UX bootcamps in general, leave those for me to answer, and I'll see you guys in the next one.